Welcome everyone. We are gathered today to talk about the power and the magic of fashion, but also maybe the responsibility it has to audiences, to the end user. So I'm really excited to see such a great variety of speakers. My name's Karen Franklin. I call myself a fashion commentator and diversity activist, and I'm really excited for you to introduce yourselves also. So can we start this way round?
Hi, I'm RUNWAY Bergdorf. I model, but also I work with brands to help them become more progressive in thinking along the lines of race or gender or just generally intersectionality.
Fabulous too.
Thank you, Dave.
My name is Felicity Hayward. I'm a plus size model and I also have a brand / movement called Self Love Brings Beauty.
Great. Hi. I'm Lucy Banks. I head up content for brands at YouTube across Europe, Middle East and Africa. So really helping people understand how to crack the YouTube code and this very overwhelming and exciting force in pop culture that's disrupted, how actually we can make sense of it. Great.
Hi, my name is Simran Randhawa. I am a model and journalist, ex-politics assistant editor at Galdem, and a lot of my work focuses on the intersectionality between like East and West and the fusion between those two.
Hi, I'm Tamara Gingic. I have worked in the fashion industry for 20 plus years, and I am also the CEO and founder of Fashion Roundtable and the secretariat for the, it's a very long word, few words, all-party parliamentary group for textiles and fashion.
Hi, I'm Sophie Matthews. My day job is Head of Media and Retail Partnerships at the British Fashion Council, but I also head up Positive Fashion at the BFC.
Hi, I'm Rob Jones, one half of Teatum Jones, and I have a label with Catherine Teatum that shows at London Fashion Week.
Thanks. I'm Catherine Teatum, the other half of Teatum Jones, and we're very happy to have you here today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Claudia Croft. I'm the deputy editor on 10 magazine. I'm also a contributing editor at British Vogue, and I've worked in the fashion industry for over 20 years and seen lots of changes and hopefully lots more to come.
Hello, I'm Claire Barnett. I am the Interim Executive Director at UN Women National Committee.
Hi, I'm Mara Ailarasai. I'm a black feminist activist and advocate, and I work for an organisation called IMCAN. We work specifically around ending violence against women and girls.
Hi, my name is Lottie Anderson. I'm an artist. I make mainly installation-based work using video, sound, print, and yeah, I think that covers it.
Thank you. Well, spectacular table, so I'm really excited to see where we go. But I want to come to you, Rob and Kat, first of all, because you are the hosts, you've brought us all together, to get a sense of your journey and the collection that you're working on now.
So Catherine and I create fashion from human stories. We've always just been inspired by people, different people, and as we've progressed and we've become more confident in this message and started to tackle issues that we've seen in the industry and try and bring in our inspiration to kind of comment and talk about those things within the industry. So
yeah, and this collection in particular is really, I feel it's an extension of Global Womanhood, which is autumn winter 18, and actually the starting point for it was a conversation with Mara on the last shoot we did, and you were talking about having just come back from training UN on intersectionality, and I had to ask you what that was because I didn't know, and we're talking like 6 months ago. So you very helpfully explained it to me, and then that got us talking to Claire about 16 Days of Activism specifically. And for us as creatives, that was just the spark. That we just felt a power just in the title, and that was what kind of started the ball rolling.
And anyone who knows your work knows that you've extended outside the bubble, really. You've created design and really enjoyable garments, but you've actually developed that conversation around what it is to be human, which has been missing from fashion industry narratives thus far, which is why it's really exciting to see what you're going to do next. But tell us a little bit specifically about the 16 activists.
So it wasn't necessarily 16 activists, it was just this title just had such a power to it, and we thought as creatives we were like, okay, that could be 16 specific textiles that have 16 slogans that we kind of pull and draw from all the research. The fact that we create fashion from human stories means humans are an incredibly important part to our research. So the starting point is talking to people. So talking to the likes of Mara, talking to the likes of Claire.
We talked to a girl that we met through Global Womanhood, was a member of Sisters Uncut, and so we met with her, and she's opened us up to a lot more other kind of frontline activists that are kind of doing a lot of work. And from those, I mean, some of the interviews can last for hours. And from that, we record those interviews, and then we go back to the studio and we listen to them on loop, and that's how it starts to infuse the colours, the themes, and everything. It really is part of the collection. But talking to Anne-Marie, who's from Sisters Uncut, she was telling us everything they do when they jumped the barriers at the suffragettes movie. And one thing activists are kind of seen as, I think in the media, is chaotic and anarchists. And she said that she gets that a lot, people kind of attacking her, going, oh, you're just an anarchist, you don't want order. She says, the amount of organisation and care that goes into an event like that was, I'm getting goosebumps, was like really eye-opening. And at the end of it, we're like, so this isn't chaotic. You're adding chaos into a situation, but the control over the whole, and how also as a group of women doing this, how they were looking after each other, and the moment where they might have to pull something like that because of danger, it really is thought about and cared. So that was kind of one of the big kind of conversations we started to have when we started our research.
I'm going to bring you in, Mara. Yeah.
Just thinking that really reminds me of deeds, not words, the suffragette slogan. That's what it's all about. If you reach a sort of barrier where you've got to take different sort of action, you have to do it, and that's, you know, that's what activists are doing.
And you obviously have collaborated with Teatum Jones before, Mara, so a powerful vehicle for you.
Yeah, so it was a really amazing experience, especially for somebody who I don't relate to fashion comfortably. You know, I'm kind of a fashion resistor rather than anything else. And so there was something about working with both of you and having that global womanhood conversation, and also pushing you a little bit to think beyond inclusivity, to think about autonomy and self-determination, and to think intersectionally, so that we're not just talking about little moments of representation, but we're talking about transformation. And I really appreciate who you both are in terms of how receptive you are to those conversations and how willing you are to learn. Because if we are to make a difference, if fashion is to be a vehicle in terms of making a difference, we need people like you to be willing to push, because people who look like me very often don't have the space or the opportunity to push back. It's actually people like you who have that kind of power, who are able to say, let's do something different. If you don't have diverse models, you know, kind of, if you're not making clothes for differently shaped bodies, if you're not having people that look like us, you know, like not just occasionally, but all the time, then actually we won't see any kind of change, you know. So it is really critical. So thank you for this conversation and for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think just kind of going off that, again, having people on like the insider status, I think is so important, like you said, because I think so often we're kind of made to do with, again, like you said, little pockets of representation, or like, you know, a brown model here, a black model there, but then actually we need people who are more behind the scenes, who are trained in like intersectionality and know more about diversity, and actually actively are educating themselves on these issues, as opposed to just like, hey, let's put these models on our runway because it like...
Well, it should never just be on the runway, it should be also who's on the board and who's in the creative teams and who's in the supply chain, because if you've got women of colour making the clothes, and then, oh yes, we'll put one woman of colour at the back somewhere, and hopefully she's a bit light on the slide of the, you know, the double page spread. What's going on in that conversation from start to finish? It's about integrating, I think.
If I could add, just to kind of give the context, so the 16 Days of Activism runs from the 25th of November, which is the International Day to End Violence Against Women and Girls, to the 10th of December, which is World Human Rights Day. And that's always designated as that time. And so throughout that time, we try to explore 16 different themes or 16 different ideas and include the creative world in that to say, you know, what does this spark off in you? I think what's really exciting about what you guys are doing is that this year, so many things have come together. So there's the centenary of the vote, there's the fact that all of these movements have really just opened the storytelling and the narrative. And we now have this opportunity to say, well, what are we going to do with that to really change the status quo? So I think, you know, we want to talk about the activists behind these movements this year, as well as the survivors and the stories on that side. And I think it's really exciting to see, as you say, throughout the value chain, so many different industries and sectors and individuals coming together and saying, how do we really create change this year, now, in the moment? And I think it's a very exciting time.
And also coming back to, you know, the fashion industry fundamentally is female facing. And you're also aligning your message around the safety of women and girls, and that I think resonates really well. How are you working and collaborating to make that message salient?
Well, to begin with, it was the initial inspiration and talking to kind of different activists to educate ourselves. But then moving forward from that is we want to work on this and keep this story going and this this conversation going. So this is kind of like an introduction to it, and then work towards February and doing something much bigger, and maybe kind of returning to a kind of a runway environment, but not being a classic runway, but doing something that actually really does say something. When we did Autumn Winter 18, Global Womanhood, and we asked 25 women just their emotions and things they felt, like really deep down, like what they felt. And we were so honoured on how open everyone was. They were like, Amy Monroe was one of our ladies, and everyone was just so open, and it was so positive. And when we actually started putting them all together, we realised how powerful that was. So for us, we wanted to kind of go on this journey and it actually be a bit kind of deeper, and also maybe try and make some changes, maybe speak to an audience to think about it. I have a son, and I'm very much, when I look at him, I want him to grow up in a different world. I want him to respect women. I want him to all the things that I have in my head. I'm like, no, I want that world to be there, and the only way you can do that is if you start doing things. So with Claire, what we're doing is now, after this, we're talking about how we can actually make more of an impact. We're talking kind of, this piece like fundraising side of things, but also how to get the message out there and actually getting people.
Bringing in our other partners. So we have, for example, all of our knitwear is manufactured by John Smedley, and actually bringing in them and saying, okay, look, your distribution power is huge. So what can we do with you? During that time, actually during the time from the 25th of November to the 10th of December, where we create a product that isn't about Fashion Week, it doesn't get caught up in the noise of Fashion Week, and that specifically kind of lies in that time, and that's specifically to this project. So it's kind of using our network and understanding that I think we both feel very privileged to have the platform that we do. We've always felt like that, and always felt that with that, we should be not just saying something. We try to say something, but actually doing something as well. But there's power in really connecting the dots between our network and kind of bringing in other partners to that.
I just wanted to bring you in, actually, because obviously as a model, that was a sort of visual platform for you, and you have been very vocal. It's been it's a big space, fashion, for you, isn't it?
For sure. But as a consumer of fashion and someone who works in the industry, but also someone that's worked with yourselves, I'm really excited to see people continuing these conversations. And I think with the way that the internet is these days, it can be so easy for something to be a hashtag and then just disappear, and that conversation stopped, and then we forget about it, and then something else happens. We're like, well, what about me too? You know. So I just want us to keep on having these conversations and develop on these conversations, to see you going from what you did last season in Autumn Winter 18, that also I was lucky enough to walk in, to see that conversation develop and then turn into something else, and think about where does this net go and how can we get that net further, and is everybody underneath this net, you know, are we pulling everyone up? I think that that's so important.
That was something as well, working with Claire, was one of the projects is Leave No One Behind, and it's the same thing. And what Tamara, you were saying is, how can we be inclusive with our casting, but then maybe we're making garments in another country where those girls aren't being protected or aren't being paid or aren't being looked after. So how then that's a break in the chain. So we're very much, we know everything that's made, where it's made. It's kind of looking at your whole kind of everything you work on, because otherwise it doesn't feel right.
You need to connect the dots with your messaging, basically, and make sure that you're kind of servicing on all levels. And it's not easy as a small
like the industry is
brand.
Like the butterfly effect, isn't it? You change one small thing and that can have such an impact in a way that you don't even realise.
But you have to do something.
Absolutely.
I think there's lots of important things here also to do with inspiring the next generation of makers and creators. So obviously honouring and respecting the end user and respecting people over the other side of the world as part of the process, but inspiring the next generation of creatives to think, you know, first about diverse casting and about how they can use their message to glamorise and iconise all bodies. I'd quite like to bring you in on that, Felicity, because obviously you're dealing with existing obstacles and perceptions around size. The fashion industry has always been very fixed
with one size. And I mean, it's the same thing when you see like bigger models of maybe celebrities using on a catwalk. And I look at that and I'm like, oh my God, like Beth Ditto's walking on a catwalk show, and then I can't then go and buy the clothes. What is the point? You're just, it's the same thing of just, it's tokenism. You're using someone for effect, whether it's the colour of their skin, whether, you know, they're being plus size or being curvy. And it's just, the whole thing I always say about is the word diversity, like it shouldn't really exist, because we're all human, we're all different in a very beautiful way, that I'm just kind of getting sick of every brand if they're using diversity as a tokenism and then they don't, like they'll do one campaign and then
it needs to be consistent.
Yeah, because the amount of things that I've done, and I'm like, I work with a brand and I'm like, okay, we're gonna use these type of models, we're gonna use these type of people, and it's gonna be really beautiful, and it comes out and it gets great effect, and then they just go back to the drawing board. Or they create a plus size collection, and the high street is the example. They create a plus size collection, they put it in the stores, and then they just take it away. And it's just not doing any favours for young minds that are trying to be involved in the fashion industry.
I do feel that that agenda is changing, and it's being led by consumers, which I think is really powerful. It's a really powerful conversation, and I think the industry is changing and has changed as a response to consumer demand. I think it's got a hell of a long way to go, but we work with students, we work with colleges, we work with what you're talking about, these young people that come into the industry, and that the way they think it's about sustainability, it's about diversity, it's about representation of them, and I think that's a huge step forward.
It is, but the sizes have got smaller for the vast majority of designers. If you look at the 90s and the era of the supermodels, yes, they were extraordinarily beautiful, but they were also, you know, I worked as an assistant then and then as an editor, and those girls were healthy and worked out, and yes, it was this kind of like goddess Amazonian woman, but you look at some of the sizes of a lot of the shows now all around the world, and those girls are way smaller than the girls 20 years ago. I'm not talking about when somebody brings in a kind of more representative, diverse casting, but as a rule, when you go to Paris or Milan or New York, those girls are tiny. Well, what on earth is that saying? I think we're in a different era. The catwalk arguably isn't even going to be as relevant in the next 10, 20 years. You know, and people are engaging in conversations. You have audiences in a way, in a new way, as models and as spokespeople. So, you know, how do you connect that with a changing didactic for the fashion industry because of the change that I think will happen to catwalk shows? So I think that allows for opportunity.
I mean, breaking up fixed mindsets is, you know, something that everybody's involved in doing, isn't it? Taking a set of thinking and blowing holes in it by saying, for the large part, your business will benefit, you know, if you make a wider broadcast. Do you want to come in?
I mean, I feel like we're also moving into talking about consumer, the fashion industry being kind of shifted by the consumers, what they want now. We're living in this sort of global fact-checking time, like particularly, you know, with YouTube, you can check everything, you know. You've got people on shoots shooting behind the scenes. You can see who the teams are. And I feel like the younger generation are really active and interested in making sure that these things aren't just, you know, that we are moving beyond tokenism. I would find often, I used to do a lot of casting and art direction, and it would be great because like outward facing, they would have me there as a sort of like emblem of things that are different or whatever. And then you'd find yourself having these very difficult conversations with the client and, you know, and it kind of, the tokenism becoming so extreme, it really being a, you know, box ticking thing, you know, one this, one that, and I was like, this is not holistic or real or natural. And I mean, ultimately, of course, we're looking to just kind of, as people who work in fashion, represent what's really out there. And it can be really tiring, I think. I personally found it really difficult, and actually, it, hurt my feelings. You know, as when I'm employed to cast, I'm immediately thinking about what I would want to see when I was little. You know, what put me off fashion? What would then inspire my sister?
I think we're also living in a time where it isn't just about the aesthetic, it's about what is your message, like what do you stand for? And I think that especially younger consumers, they don't want to just buy into a brand because it looks good. They want to buy into something because they want to own something that is in line with their beliefs or their politics or the change that they want to see in the world. And especially with, you know, in the time that we're living in, it's so politically turbulent. People want to know what you believe. And personally, I feel conned if I've spent, you know, 5 years of my life investing money in a brand, essentially funding that brand. And then, you know, a scandal comes out with them, you know, slagging off some minority. It's really disheartening, especially as a marginalised person. So I feel that the younger generation are so aware of what's happening, and they're going to be the change that, you know, we've messed so much up in our generations. So I really, I think that it's about that message and how are you going to provide the solution.
I'd like to bring Claudia in if I could, just as a journalist who's been across all this and seeing the change, and wondering whether now your readers are more vocal and are
absolutely
prompting you to address things that maybe they've just gotten sort of shoved under the carpet.
I think in a way the readers were ahead of the magazines. In so many ways, they were sort of advocating for change and pushing for change, and a lot of people had turned away from fashion because it didn't look like them, it didn't speak to them, it was kind of stuck in a weird kind of time warp actually. And when you think about catwalk shows, they haven't changed for like 30 years. There is a sort of, I mean, fashion is supposed to be forward thinking, this is the idea of it, but in so many ways it is stuck in the past. And I think there is a new generation of editors, and there's also a new generation of creatives out there, and models and voices, and the fact that people have their own individual voices now through social media. And I think that is creating this almost a wall of change that's going to sweep through the industry. And I think, Monroe, you're right about a new generation that's coming along. I think in 10 years' time, magazines will look really, really different. They will feel different. There'll be a different emotional connection, I think, that people will have with fashion, because fashion is a great way to express who you are. You know, there's so many positive things about fashion, and people are going to seize that. I feel like they're going to seize it and use it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd quite like to come to that just for a quick round the table, because we all wear clothes, we all engage with image, we all want to curate a self, and you know, also as in some ways as reformers of an industry that we are part of, that we enjoy being part of, we can see the problematic aspects of it, but it would be interesting to find out how you engage with fashion. What does it mean to you? Is it something that is liberating and exciting, or a facilitator, or an idealised self? When you go to get dressed in the morning?
I mean, I just instantly go for anything that's going to accentuate my confidence and just make me feel like the best version of myself.
Yeah.
I think growing up, fashion was, it was trial and error, and I didn't know who I was, and it was like, you know, just, I'm going to try this on, and if this feels like me, then, you know, I'll go in this direction. But now I'm at a point where I know who I am. I just want something that's going to accentuate everything that's already within me. So, yeah, I know what feels good, but it takes a while to get to that point, I think. And that's why it's so important that younger generations are having this goodness put out into the world. You know, that it's not about telling someone who they can be, it's about providing an option. So that,
and lots of choices.
Yeah, lots and lots of choices, and that no one feels like a trend. I want to wear a brand that I know has good intentions for the industry and for the world, but also that makes me feel myself and sexy and happy and fun and everything that I am. So,
But as fashion, we do need to be providing for everyone. Everyone needs to feel like they can look beautiful.
I think most people around this table would agree, though, that actually even tall, thin white women do not feel good about their bodies, even though they see themselves mirrored in images, because fashion has a way of being so overproduced. I'd like to come round, though, just to get a kind of sense of the meaningfulness of fashion in your lives and how you use it.
So I think the really interesting is the power shift. So this disconnect between like real people, real women, and the industry is so pronounced, and never more so. And actually, I used to be exec creative director at a publishing company, had Grazia and lots of fashion magazines, and for me, the move to YouTube was actually about that democratization of information, and actually anybody with a phone, an internet connection, and a great idea can present themselves and present their version. And we have a parallel world, particularly for women, where any woman, you don't need a commissioning editor to decide if your idea is right. You don't need somebody to say, you've got the right body shape. And actually what it sees is lots and lots of women creating content, whether it's in sport, or it's in entrepreneurial areas or fashion or any area of pop culture. And we've seen this disruption because actually what plays out is huge communities galvanizing around these, you know, these very disruptive for the establishment images. And it also plays out, I mean, we can see in search trends, we can see, you know, sustainable clothing is up like 1,600% in terms of searches. We see all these sort of, you know, the reflection of actually what women really want is a very, very different story to actually what that sort of small, homogenous, elite stranglehold has previously been in saying, this is fashion, darling. Because actually the world is going, you know, fuck off, we don't want that. We want, you know, we've got our own ideas, we have our own style, we have our own creativity, and we'll actually now take back the power and get it on our own terms.
Brilliantly
put. So exciting.
Brilliantly put. And in a way, Galdem is an exact sort of example of that, isn't it?
And it was really, exactly. I think for us, Galdem has been like a roller coaster ride, but in like the best way, because sometimes you don't, I think a lot of us on the team are like on the inside, and so we're working so hard to, you know, get the next issue out, make sure like the website's updated and this and that, but sometimes you don't actually realise like the impact it is having. And then like we do an event or like we'll get messages and it's like, whoa, like I think that's kind of one of the reasons why it's almost taken off in the way that it has. And it's weird because you know that the audience for like such a long time has been craving to be represented in a non-stereotypical, nuanced way, but why hasn't that happened? And it's like, okay, so we really do have to take charge of our own stories and our own narratives and put them out and not wait for anybody else to, which goes hand in hand with exactly what you were saying. And I used to work as like a model when I was like 17, 18, and literally, Felicity, exactly what you were saying, like there was so much body issues which just stemmed from that, because being 17, I was kind of plucked out of the middle of the street in Camden and then taken into this amazing office in Angel, and they were like, okay, you just need to lose like, I think it was 9 centimetres off your waist. And then they put me in touch, 9, and they put me in touch with a nutritionist. And the nutritionist was like, for breakfast, you should have a quarter of an avocado and 6 almonds. I remember that very clearly. And it's just like, you know what I mean? And from that, it was just a downward spiral. So for a long time, I was put off high fashion because of the effects it had on my mental health. And I would say it was only until maybe 2.5 years ago, with actually the rise of social media and the finding communities in social media who I resonated with, who I felt represented in these like new media forms, because I wasn't seeing myself in traditional media forms, that I kind of felt empowered to like, again, reclaim my style and re-experiment again.
I think one of the things that we are increasingly trying to think about is that fashion presents amazing possibilities in terms of representation, in terms of saying, why should people of all genders not be able to just try on a different outfit and try on a different role? But it also has that incredible responsibility, and I think we don't yet understand fully all of the links between, you know, the clothes that we wear, the images that we're presented with in popular culture, things like eating disorders, objectification, self-objectification, and violence against women and girls. And I think when we look at those underlying factors, because violence against women and girls, you know, it often doesn't happen in plain sight. It goes on behind closed doors, in homes, you know, in refugee camps, and within actually often pieces of popular culture that we consume and don't necessarily see because we come from a certain position. So I think it's also thinking about, you know, all the way from the women who are producing the textiles that are going into the fashion that we're using and consuming ourselves, all the way to when we make those purchase decisions, and there's an opportunity for brands to say, how am I going to use this as a commercial advantage? So I've got somebody who's either investing in a piece of high fashion because it's about legacy, or I've got, you know, someone using their pocket money to buy their first outfit and it's about identity and part of a community. And I think we have the responsibility to think, tracing it back through the value chain, what impact does that have on violence against women, and how can we actually change behaviour to stop that happening rather than reinforcing it?
But I think that's been happening because the Me Too movement has hit the fashion industry. I think it's only hit it. There's a long way more to go, but certain photographers now not being booked. We all knew. I spoke out at the end of the 90s about an experience I had with a photographer who's only now been dismantled at the end of last year, who was making millions each year. And I was told to be flattered by that incident.
But I think what you're pointing to, and sort of what is comes up under the diversity conversation, of course, is that it's got to be behind the lens, it's got to be in leadership, there's got to be mixed opinions.
You can't just have it, oh, we've got to worry about what's going on over there, we've got to assess what's going on within, you know, how are the interns being treated? You know, fashion assistants have been doing, but fashion assistants, the Instagram site, I've been working with them, and you know, the stories that have been coming up for them has been, to me, someone that started over 20 years ago. I'm like, still?
I'd like to hear about that, if I may, Sophie, because you know, thinking about the amount of young creatives that would tune into this conversation and feel at the beginning of their career that they want to know how to go forward. Graduate Fashion Week, overwhelmingly, we had a board and they said that the key things they prioritised were sustainability, diversity and happiness, good mental health in the workplace.
I mean, there's a lot that we've been doing under the radar for a long time, but I guess the change, and I think someone alluded to it before, is the power of collective influence. And I think that's something that we feel we can bring together at the BFC, because obviously we're a platform, but also how do we get the industry together? So we started something last year called the Models First Initiative, which is all about empowering models and protecting this and safeguarding models, but effectively it's about safeguarding everyone in the industry. And so that's about getting brands, stylists, casting directors all in the room to have quite difficult conversations. Because
have you had those?
Yeah, we've started.
Okay.
And models, and some of those conversations are relatively difficult, but if you have like an Edward at the helm or Sophia Neofitu as the stylist, you actually start to have some very powerful conversations and an understanding that things need to change. So we can, as the BFC, we can lead those conversations. And then I guess the other thing is positive fashion is enormously huge for us. It's an initiative that started as a relatively small thing, but because of industry, because of consumer demand, because of designers, and also because at the BFC we're a really young, dynamic group of women that are really passionate about sustainability, about diversity, about ethics, about community. Positive fashion is now like runs through everything that we do. Certainly our new chairman, it's instead of it being the small initiative over here, it's absolutely tantamount to every single thing that we do. So I certainly see that shift from a kind of industry-led perspective, and how we're working more with like Teatum Jones or Christopher Rayburn or Bethany Williams, whose designs then go back into Vauxhall Food Bank and all her profit, you know, and that's the insurgence for us from the industry.
Of which people can read up on the
Yes,
website,
of
I
course.
hope.
Yeah.
So I do want to come to Kat and Rob at this moment in time and talk about those reactions, the emotions of others, you know, the feedback that you've had as a result of doing something that really we shouldn't have to be having a conversation about, showing a broader range of body ideals.
One thing that really stands out for me is a conversation we had with a news channel who were quite, it was after our Body Part 1, Autumn Winter 17, and they were quite aggressive in their questioning to us. A different experience after a show to have that kind of interview. But they were kind of going, but why have you used models with disabilities? And they kept asking the why, and the two of us just were like, why not?
Yeah.
We're both from
London.
both born and bred Londoners, and
Also,
all we're doing is reflecting exactly what we've grown up with and what we see. That is our normal, and that's the world that we want to create within our brand.
We also sell internationally.
Yeah.
So like different corners of the world. So why, if women are wearing us around the world, why would we not represent them when we show it to them? It's just a bit. For us, it's just we don't get it. Like why? Yeah, it was when we just both said, why not? Why wouldn't we do this? And also when we cast, it's about who comes in that room, and just excites us.
Yeah,
like
it's about energy.
when you mentioned the supermodels, I was like a teenager with the supermodels, and just like applying to St. Martin's and really excited about getting to the industry. And the reason I loved them was, now looking back, it wasn't all perfect, but they were individuals. Yeah. Like you had Naomi, you had Tyra, you had Cindy. Cindy was like the American bomb. I loved the fact that they were all these like strong individual women that was what was put to me by the media. So I was like, I just obsessed by them. And then that kind of individuality just kind of gradually disappeared just as I was actually finishing college and getting into the industry. And I missed it, because all the women in my life are like superheroes. They're just amazing women, but they're all very different and they're great at their thing. And I love that.
Maybe I can bring Mara in. The understanding of how to motivate people, the understanding of, you know, ethics, good practice, and how we go forward. It would be a key thing to address here, and something that, you know, Claire flagged up is often after conversations like this, where many people who might watch look in are full of good intentions. What do they do? So, Mara, what do you tell people to do? And perhaps if anybody wants to contribute something small where they've seen this is how we have seen change happen as a result of this small thing.
So a couple of things around that, Karen. So one of the things is, when I hear the term diversity, sometimes I think that's lovely, and other times I get actually quite anxious, because very often what it means is that you've got a norm, and then you've got add black women and stir, add trans women and stir, you know, add a plus size model and stir, because actually there's an idea of a particular type of norm, and some of us sitting around the table are not that norm. We're the thing that gets added in order to make the thing interesting at that precise moment, or because there's a bit of pressure. And so for me, one of the things that we have to do is start to work from the margins to the centre. If we're going to talk about leave no one behind, actually one of the things to then think about is we need to disrupt the idea of what womanhood is. Like, the very idea actually provides us with a sense of, you've got this idea of womanhood, which is white, heterosexual, you know, kind of non-disabled, a particular body size, you know, like just there's all of these things. And if we're willing to disrupt that, and if we're willing to say, you actually start to recenter it. So you start to recenter it, so the thing that is considered plus size then becomes the norm. That then becomes central. You know, somebody like Monroe is not, as Monroe says, you know, not the exceptional, the monopoly, you know, that's an uncomfortable monopoly. You're then saying, if you're having women of colour, that actually you can have dark-skinned women of colour, that it's not always light-skinned, do you know, or ethnically ambiguous women, or, you know, so you then start to do it in such a way that we're starting to shift the consciousness in terms of the things that people are seeing all the time. And I think that's also the thing that feels really powerful. And then there's something around just showing up. Like for me, there's something around when we're there, when we're in a room, when we're visible and when we're speaking out, actually that does make a difference. You know, the thing about what fashion does for us, when I was doing the Golden Globes this year and I said to the stylist, I don't wear women's clothing. I don't. I'm a queer woman of colour who wanted to show up in a tux. And actually for me that was really important, because that's the thing that was going to make me feel good on the day. What then happened from that is, coming after that day, like I had all of these young butch women kind of contacting me going, it meant everything to see you on that red carpet looking like that. And so in that moment you might be like, yo, I'm dressed in Monroe, but when you dress Monroe, actually what that's doing is that's saying something to a whole group of young women who are dreaming about being Monroe. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's something about or dreaming about being Felicity, not dreaming about me, presumably. Not going to model. but do you know what I mean? There's something around like like bringing the bodies to that space and having people being able to show up. And for me, that feels like really powerful leadership, because then what you're doing is you're saying, this is a new norm. This is actually the new norm, because the past that we're talking about, when we're saying, you know, the fashion industry was stuck in the past, it wasn't a good past. It was still racist, it was still homophobic, it was still all of those things. So what's the new norm that we want to create? And if you two are willing to like get in there and untidy up the place, you've got our support, you know, in doing that.
One thing as well, as you said, like the mixing in, is then the next movement, and I know Monroe's done a lot of work in the gay community with this, with Grindr, is they're not labelling it. So I just think when you were saying that, it's like not having an agency go, so what are you looking for? Like that, like a shopping list, and go, do you want, do you want black girls, or do you want this kind of girls, do you want this kind of girls? It's kind of going, and I'm not 100% sure how you move that forward, but it's how to kind of change, the language is so important. How do you change that language?
Critical mass, like critical mass, because actually if we're anxious, that's what I'm saying, if it's add the black woman and stir, then it's always going to be that you still have a norm, which is the white woman, and then the black woman is the exception. So then people do get to go, I'm looking for a black girl. Do you know what I mean? Actually, there is something about recentering it. So you're saying the new norm looks like all of us. And the new norm looks like you tip the scale potentially in the other direction till it starts to level out. Because for me, that's what it looks like in terms of leadership, you know? It looks like saying who's behind the scenes, but who are people also seeing? Because if we don't do that, we will be having this conversation 10 years from now, and I don't want us to be doing that.
I think if we can empower, you know, certainly Lottie, you've talked about, you know, as a younger person, being in an environment in which you've wanted to change things and you've got the old guard. Empowering the next generation to ask questions, not feel they have to have all the answers, not feel that they have to have the confidence to go in and change it, but to ask questions in the way you have.
Absolutely, and I think also to talk about what you were saying about the suffragettes and Sisters Uncut, mobilising, you know, like who just shot the front cover of American Vogue? It's a 23-year-old black man. Like, what the hell is going on? This is incredible. And I feel like the thing that fashion, or maybe the mistake it was, is it sort of was functioning a little bit outside of popular culture, and then what you have is fashion kind of catching up and realising that, it cannot kind of function outside of those things. And also, you know, if you look at popular culture, what is the dominant popular culture? Like, actually, it's often hip hop, or like, you know, that it's Rihanna, it's Beyonce, it's all of these amazing women, and they make choices also and kind of overstep the publications or overstep the designers. They're going, oh, well, we're just going to actually do our research and style and pick our team. I mean, certainly now, whenever it comes to anything I'm doing, if it's casting, art directing, making artwork, I'm very, very conscious of making sure that there's space for people who are just coming through, you know, they're like just graduating or in their last year. You know, I get messages on Instagram all the time, how can I come to your studio? What are you working on next? And it's like, as far as I'm concerned, there's this amazing democratization of skills.
And coming back to 21st century tools and 21st century broadcast, where anybody, it can be their own publisher, that's clearly something that we're going to see grow.
I mean, you know, that's really exploded on YouTube, but I think actually the really sort of tough thing to think about as well is that money talks. And when you're always thinking about, right, how do we actually affect some change? I think, you know, really brutally understanding the consumer power and actually getting, you know, actually in the same way that the food industry has managed to do in terms of the provenance and the food chain and everything. You know, I don't think we're there with fashion, and that for me, you know, exactly like the work you're doing is so inspiring, and also just, you know, will get people to spend their money. And actually, ultimately, in the fashion industry, you know, yes, it's about creativity, it's about self-expression, it's about making money. And I think too often we kind of, you know, get into a discussion about values, and this is important for the right reasons for society, and it's good for society, but it's also good for business. And I think when we can start to understand how to actually unlock, you know, better business with better practice, then the whole world transforms.
One thing I'd like to add is I'm really concerned with the utilisation of privilege and the fact that certain people, just as you touched on earlier, just aren't listened to. So I can speak about racism and transphobia all I like, and it will be perceived in a very different way than, say, if you two were to speak about it. So sometimes it is very much about saying, I can't do all of this myself, help me, and use it, and use the privilege that you have to pull up. Because otherwise just things aren't going to happen. And the real issue is that there's so many people within the fashion industry and beauty industries that have a responsibility largely because they've got the privilege to make the change, and they're waiting on people that are marginalised to make the change for them because they don't know how to do it. So really, if they don't know how to do it, then there needs to be more investment in consultancy and investing in the communities that are essentially changing the world with how we view womanhood and how we view culture, because Black culture is the dominant culture in pop culture, as you said. I mean, you look at the charts, you look at magazines, you look at even how young white girls in their teens are dressing. The influence of Black culture on pop culture is undeniable. And there's a responsibility there that it needs to be protected and it needs to be nurtured and it needs to be encouraged so that things like appropriation don't happen.
I think there's also an honesty piece about not being afraid to put your hand up and say, actually, I don't understand what I should be saying, and is this okay, and is that representation not okay? And just say, look, help me, you know, I've got a position of privilege to share and I don't know how to share.
And
that.
I must say
That's what happened. Tell me what intersectionalities about my own.
And you've taught me tons. Face to face and also from Instagram, but some things that I kind of
for sure. Well, I'm learning all the time
make you look
as
at yourself,
well.
and I think what's great as well is that you're coming. It's a very much a conversation, and it's like, and then the conversations we've had as well. It's like, you know, it's just educating different people.
I think it's about, for me, what's very critical and has been for the last few years is breaking down echo chambers. So I worked in an echo chamber that I wasn't quite aware was an echo chamber, and then I went on a mentoring scheme for women to go into politics. I ended up working in Westminster, and I was in another echo chamber, and I'd look around the room and I'd be like, there's definitely no one like me here. And we're talking about Brexit, or we're talking about this, and it's like, Jesus Christ, back here I've got all these people screaming, but they're not in the room, and I have to use this opportunity of this access, because if I don't, I'm worried that it's not being heard. And that has driven me through, you know, every level of not quite knowing what I'm doing, but yes, I've just got to do it, because the consequences of not doing it felt epic, and I can't put it any other way. And that's what's been my driving force.
I love the point about money talks. I just think it's absolutely
But the voter also talks. They're the same thing. That's what I mean. The consumer is the constituent. You have to use your agency. Otherwise, you are not being heard, and somebody else over there really is being heard.
But I know it sounds gratuitous, but it is literally about power, you know, and only to affect these changes, you have to think of like, what are those things that actually will make the difference? And I think one of the things, so I've done that unconscious bias training, and I keep doing it on the Harvard website, because it is the thing of...
It should be mandatory.
But it's like, it should be. And also I think, you know, you sort of... I think the new generation, you know, everybody has good intent, but everybody needs to be educated and understand like all of these issues. And so it's about making sure that I honestly think that if we can come together to find ways so that the consumer who has good intent and wants to see this, you know, positive disruption happen, but actually if we can give them ways to vote with their money, you know, that's the way to come together to try and sort of, you know, make that change happen.
I think they already are voting with their money, because there have been some really groundbreaking studies done that show that when an audience member of an image can make a bond with that model, they show an increased intention to purchase by 300%. So all brands really need to latch onto that, but that's something that I think Teatum Jones have done really quite instinctively and naturally. You've just wanted to open out your world, and you know, as such a pathfinders, and I know it's not been without its kind of which way do we go and how do we go, but I really want to sort of and I hope everyone will join with me in saying what an amazing job that you've done, and keep going. But thank you very much, everyone. I think it was a great inspirational talk.
Thank you. Thank all of you.